Hi, good morning, everyone. Is everyone happy with the lighting and everything? Everyone all good? Yeah, cool. So apologies for the delayed start. We were just waiting for anyone else that's coming in. My name is Montell Ferguson. I've been asked here today to talk about mental health and my experience of living with a health condition. It was challenging to decide exactly what to talk about in such a short time frame. So I picked key moments out of my life that I'm going to basically try and build a picture in your mind that you can hopefully extract helpful insight from. I'm not really here to persuade you of anything. I'm not here to convince you of anything. And there will be things that I say where I contradict myself, and I perhaps even contradict your lecturers. And I may even say things that are quite paradoxical. I'm just sharing my experiential truth as information and my integrated understanding of those experiences. You are free, of course, to interpret this presentation how you wish and how you're able to. Some of you will definitely be inspired, some of you may be triggered. If all else, if anything you take from this whole experience, I hope you are entertained. You will also, hi, good morning. Don't worry, it's okay. Just in time. You will also see this guy pop up as a light attempt to make, I don't know, light of some of the things that I touch on because it can, be quite sensitive. So, what I'm going to talk about today are as follows, but not really in any particular order. My experience of life so far, living with a health condition, how it affects my life, seeking and receiving support, my ongoing journey of recovery, how it's actually impacted my life positively, the evolution of myself and my identity in the process. And of course, I'm going to mention triggering and sensitive information. If at any point you don't want to be in the classroom, you're more than welcome to leave and return or not return, no pressure. And also, yeah, what else was I going to say? Also, if you don't want to pay, hi, good morning, pay direct eye contact and you need to look away, it's no problem. You can just listen in if you feel inclined. There will be space at the end to ask questions, but if there's anything throughout that's burning and you feel like you need to ask and you want to chip in, you are more than welcome to, join in. This is a co-creative space. So I'm going to start with a simple question. It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer out loud. I just want you to see what comes to mind for yourself and see what your first and second impressions or thoughts are from yourself. So, what is the title of this chapter of your life? Very simple question. I asked that, and you could also see it as what chapter have you just come out of, or what chapter are you going into? And do you feel like you are the creator or receiver of this? And are you happy with how your life is unfolding? I kind of asked this, or the purpose of this question is to basically prime your mind to be reflective of yourself and your life while I share details of my life and see where there may be parallels or things that you can relate and just extract that insight. So, who am I to be asking you questions about your life story and the chapter that you're in? So, I will talk a bit about myself. I am born and raised in Bristol. My name is Montell, as I said. I'm 28 years old. If you're into astrology and that stuff, I am a Cancer. I was born in July. I have 4 brothers and 8 sisters, which may be important to note a bit later on. I have my working background is in sports coaching, and then I went to do mentoring. I studied sport and exercise science at University of Gloucestershire for a time, and I experienced emotional intensity disorder. That's the diagnosis, the label that I was given. It does parallel with borderline personality disorder, and they did say I show symptoms and behaviors of that, but apparently this is more of an appropriate fit for me. Because of that, I have engaged with the health services, and for that reason, I technically am a service user. And I've done a personality test, and I came up as a INFJA, if that means anything to you, in case you were curious. Some other labels people say that I am over the years. I'm a motivational speaker, but I wouldn't really say that. I would just say I speak my truth and I am myself. And in my own world where I practice energy healing, some people also say I'm a yogi or a mystic. But again, it doesn't really matter if, it's just myself, I guess. Other people have also said I'm a focused person, determined, assertive. I'm also quite calm and compassionate. I also say I am logical and very intuitive. Paradoxical, of course. Some other labels that I've been given is intense, strange, sensitive, crazy, narcissistic, and peaceful. So I find my balance between all of these contrasting aspects of myself. Some more things I've discovered about myself on my journey is that I like to problem solve and find unique solutions. Life is always presenting new problems, so this is something that I've learned that I had to embrace. I like pursuing whatever excites and empowers me, guiding and empowering others to do the same, being creative and expressive in all of the different ways and mediums that I like to do so. And I love to deepen my spiritual connection to life because I never always had that, or I was unconscious of that for a long time. I would just say I've always been a person that likes to know myself and life with a broader perspective and deeper understanding. I've always been seeking truth, you could say. And when I was young, I was always like watching space documentaries and, the outside world. Also, I would say that I like to, or other things that I like to enjoy and encourage me to thrive is to study. More particularly, I like to study languages. I taught myself Spanish. I have a 1,000-day Duolingo streak. Super crazy, right? Discipline focused. I like to study philosophy, ontology, and human potential because we are biomachines and we are still accessing what we can actually do. I also like to do sports. I like to play badminton. I played football in the past. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is something else I do. Cooking, music, trading the markets when I feel inclined to. And I also produce a podcast as well. There's a lot of things that I like to do. But I wasn't always like this. I had to discover all of this. I did say that I like to enjoy expanding my awareness and knowing my life with a broader perspective. And as part of that, I had to include all that I had ignored or neglected about myself. And one aspect about myself for a long time that I hadn't explored or thoroughly been through at least was my intense emotional state of being. I call it that now, but at one point it was an obscure, abstract, separate thing that I was not really inclusive of in my reality and my worldview. So now I'm going to explore and break down my experience of emotional intensity before I talk more about my journey. So emotional intensity for me can feel like an entity that will reframe my perception. Over time, I've recognized certain characteristics for how I experience this. So I kind of label it in here as emotional intensity. And let's say I'm not balancing or regulating myself, or before I learn how to regulate myself, I would genuinely be in these types of states. My window of tolerance towards things that are happening would be very narrow, and I might get upset, angry, intense in any way, be hypersensitive. My mood could shift very quickly, like hot and cold type of personality, and unstable identity where for a time I couldn't really feel grounded in my life, in my world, so I didn't know who I was, and I would just always be shifting between whatever felt right. Not a clear sense of self, you might say. I'll go into some of the symptoms, how that may manifest. Ones I'm very familiar with is depression and despair. I spent a lot of time, let's say, in that dark space, you might say, and for a time I did start to identify with that solely. Also, I would say anger and frustration is something that has been very prevalent in my life. I say that I fought more inanimate objects than I'm proud to share, but that is how I used to, manage or express how I was feeling because I didn't know how to for a long time. Also, I can be hyper aroused where, it's extremes. I can be really excited and I can be, not think. I might be impulsive. And this will also manifest as certain behaviors as well, depending on, the triggering or the initial catalyst or cause. I would be a person that might withdraw and isolate myself from the world. And let's say I'm feeling hyper aroused or the total opposite. I may not direct my emotional energy in the right way. That would also lead to me being self-destructive sometimes where I don't care about the outcome. I just, don't want to feel what I'm feeling, or I don't know how to feel what I'm feeling. So I would be reckless, self-sabotage, suppress myself, and indulge in some ways, sometimes in inappropriate ways, I suppose. And I may overreact and perceive situations in like a hyperbolic sense and blow it out of proportion. That's when I'm out of balance. Right here, right now, it's not really like that. But this is something that I had to live with, and I would say I was within for a very, very long time. So some of the things that may challenge or trigger me to, let's say, enter those states or make me feel disturbed, let's say, would be abusive language. That could be, when people just, speak in an unfriendly tone, or different threats, whether it's emotional or perhaps even physical. I don't appreciate that. There's, of course, when people dictate or manipulate as well, and when people are impatient with me because I like to take my time when I do things, and when people interfere and distract me towards my goals and my purpose. I find that, that can challenge me, that will trigger me and, make me potentially want to express some of those more distorted behaviors. Of course, self-abuse and sabotage. Even when I witness other people do that, it can trigger something within me. Unhelpful criticism, and interestingly, future planning. It'll be like, hey, do you want to, go somewhere in a week or a month? I'm like, ask me on the day or ask me the day before. That's not always useful because for something like this, I've got to prepare and, I have to be able to commit to that. That fear of commitment, you could say, would be because I didn't know how to manage my emotional state. So I didn't know how I was going to feel. Whereas I can, let's say, choose today, I want to be here and feel empowered. And all of these things, I'm not saying that I don't do these things. I certainly have, and I've certainly experienced these things. But I'm just mindful of when I see these things, I'm like, okay, for me, these are the things that I've got to be careful because it may make me behave in a distorted way. But, there are some times when people, let's say, they haven't discovered that they may be the person that, let's say, wants to be manipulated. So then they may present themselves to me and I say, well, the way you present your energy, I can't engage because they may be, let's say, opening up their energy field to being manipulated and any of these other things anyway. Because some people allow that. And in my own world for a long time, I would allow all of these things to happen to me. And now where I'm, let's say, on the other side of that, I have to be mindful of people that, let's say, are doing the same thing. So now I'm going to add some more personal context. I'm going to talk very quickly on some of the simple things that I may struggle with when, let's say, I'm in those more intense states. Of course, being self-destructive, fighting wolves, and things like that. My hygiene may drop. There are times when I'm not proud to say where I'd be like staying in my room and I haven't showered for like 2 days. Again, it's just a lack of self-love. I just didn't know what to do. I would just, let's say, like a husk of a person. Of course, being aggressive towards myself and, wolves, making decisions. Let's say I'm given the option of doing various different things. Sometimes it's like, it's too overwhelming. I can't decide. And of course, meeting my needs, specifically health related. When it came to other people, I could struggle when it came to communicating and maintaining healthy relationships. I didn't always know how to express myself. I had the vocabulary, but it's like I didn't have the courage and vulnerability to be able to speak my truth for a long time. And of course, I've been aggressive with other people. When I say dismissive, it can be like, well, I feel like this, so I don't care about how you feel in that sense. Or I feel so intense and I can't cope. I don't care that you're going through your own stuff as well. So not to say that I'm, trying to be malicious in any way, but I could be, very self-centered in a way like that. And I can become withdrawn, or my perceptions of people may change. Let's say someone that I know is hanging out with someone that I don't prefer or don't like. I might think, oh, they're plotting against me, or, they're talking about me, as a type of paranoia. So these are things that I had to be mindful of for a long time because my overactive imagination would, let's say, get the better of me. And some of the tasks that I might, struggle with is exercise and sports and the things that I actually enjoy in life. I wouldn't do the things that I know that I enjoy, and life is here to be experienced. But for a long time where, I didn't feel like I was embracing myself or like I was worthy, I just wouldn't allow myself things that I like to do. I wouldn't cook, even though I know how to. I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't socialize, and I would essentially just neglect all of my responsibilities that had to be, attended to. I just couldn't focus. I was so immersed and I didn't have the capacity to even open up to anything else for a long time. So I'm going to add some more personal context by talking about my childhood development. So I'll say my early years were somewhat challenging. I lived between my parents' house over the years because they weren't together. Of course, I had a lot of siblings, don't forget. And I was always being told that I was a bright student in primary school. I remember never having an issue understanding the work that I had to do and the learning that we had. My issue was just being in a classroom around lots of different people and all of the other things that came with that. I'd say my parents had divided attention, of course, because there were so many kids. And that's not to say that they did anything wrong or bad, but understandably that when there's so many people around, they can't potentially give someone like me the special care and attention that I needed as a young person. And you'll learn more as I go into my journey, but the things that I did do for myself, my parents wouldn't have done for myself. So they did exactly what they needed to do for what I needed at that time. You could say they played the role they were supposed to play. But I never really felt grounded and secure growing up. And I was always quick to become angry and withdrawn, especially from criticism, which is very interesting as well. Um, I struggled to communicate what I was feeling, despite knowing something felt off. It's like I could understand what was happening to a degree, but it was still disempowering because I didn't know how to express that as a young person. And it was always like being told, oh, don't worry about it, or, just brush it under the rug. Um, I had a little self confidence and self worth, despite knowing I had a lot of potential, which is even more confusing and disempowering. Because if I know I can, be a overachiever and excel, but yet I can't even bring myself to do that, I'd always be in that limbo place where I'm straddling, I don't know, accessing my potential, I suppose. I was always labeled angry, short-tempered, sensitive, schizo, psycho, and all of those types of labels. As a young person, you would, let's say, take on those things because you don't have any, let's say, filter or context to say, I can be something else. But I would always say I felt loved and supported by my parents and the people around me. In the context of, let's say, love languages, the way my parents expressed their love language to me, I would say wouldn't be particularly how I needed to receive it, as I've learned to, embrace myself. But as I say, they did what they could with what they had and the information they had. And again, at that time, it's very different. So going into my adolescent years, I would say secondary school is when I could say I really, truly felt the first depth of depression. And I call it that because that's how I knew it at that time. I didn't get the label of emotional intensity until the last couple of years of my life. But my sensitivity and emotional intensity only increased as I grew older, and that also reflected in my behavior. I remember always having really poor sleep quality during my adolescent years. I was always overstimulated, playing a lot of video games because I didn't want to be in the world and living my life, and I would just withdraw from everything. I wasn't necessarily a bad student. I would just say I was misunderstood and disconnected from myself, really and truly, and that made it difficult for me to connect with other people. It was very noticeable at times. I was disruptive and I struggled to function in class. I would say that was a type of attention seeking in some way. And I missed large amounts of school during the age of 14 to 16. I remember I was referred to counseling and they diagnosed me as depressed at that time. And again, as a 15-year-old, roughly, what does that even mean, I did have resistance to going because I didn't really accept it. I would say that I didn't particularly identify with that label of being a depressed person. Like, at that age and at that time, that just wasn't really in my worldview, So when I was doing the counseling at that time, I didn't really open up and I was unable to really receive what they were offering at the time. I never spoke about with my friends because, at that year or those years where you're, in school and it's quite like the jungle and it's all about, external perceptions in some ways and not really understanding it myself and also maybe not knowing how my friends may interpret it as well. It's not something I was really prepared to even talk about. But I left school at that time with very little qualification. I think I had like 3 GCSEs, not including English and maths, although I was very capable. But I would also say I had very valuable experiences from school, and I certainly look back fondly at that time. It was definitely challenging though. But the key point to remember is that I never addressed the emotional intensity and the manifesting depression. So if I go on to my early adulthood, I would say I just moved on with life and I found some purpose in sports coaching. I would say I was a natural leader, I was innovative, I was observant, and it was recognized. The people in my field would always, give me opportunities to keep building on that. It was a great outlet for me through a great medium. I learned how to connect with people because I would go to local parks and I would just have a bag of sports equipment and I would just be able to just have fun really, and that was my job at the time. And I went back into education. I went to SGS College and I'd done my English and Maths GCSE, and I proved to myself, I'm not stupid. It's not like I'm incapable. I just realized that I wanted to show myself that I could do this. So I did it. And then I also won awards and I became independent. I was self-employed and, things were flowing very well, I would say. I was clear, I was focused, I had a purpose, a trajectory, and I was doing that up until I was around the age of 23. I'd say I had the charisma, the personality, and the ego, and on the outside, I certainly looked happy. But I certainly still didn't have any real emotional connection to myself. It was all, let's say, a bit superficial. Not that I didn't have its place and its purpose. It was, building towards something, but there was something that was lacking still. I still not didn't really have any understanding of the underlying conditions that were affecting me. And I used to say, if I can't see it or touch it, it's not real, or I don't feel emotions, which is a very strong and bold statement to make, being an emotional person. But it just goes to show the disconnect that I was living in for a long time. So going into my early adulthood, I did go to UWE and I slowly started to lose momentum. The denial of my condition was basically unsustainable, but I didn't really care. I functioned well during the first year. I remember I was doing good. I had good grades. I was playing football. But after the highs of year two varsity and my declining grades, by the time I got into the start of year three, roughly 5 years ago now, I basically slowly descended into like a dark space, and I just wasn't leaving my room. I eventually stopped going to football, and being a person that likes to be athletic and do sports and whatnot. When I recognized that I wasn't going to football, I was like, okay, this is getting a bit serious. But I also didn't know what to do about that. I would wander the streets, and I just wouldn't eat. I was just in a very, very dissociative state. Something wasn't right. I knew that because being a coach in the past, it's like, well, if one of my young people were doing that, I'd say something's wrong, get some help. So I kind of I could see myself in that light in a way. I remember I always wanted to be angry. I wanted to just feel something. I wanted to have a reason to feel my emotions, but I was only really familiar with my anger and depression and the darker emotions, you could say. I remember I reached out at one point to Samaritans via email because I struggled to actually vocally express how I was feeling. It always felt like there was like a lump in my throat and the words wouldn't come together for me to express what I am feeling. And again, feelings are very abstract anyway, so it's very hard to, let's say, pinpoint exactly what a feeling may be. Enough people noticed that I wasn't myself. My parents noticed that I had spiraled into this dark space that I was very familiar with, and I began to solely identify with the symptoms of my condition because, I proved to myself that I could hit these highs and do great things, but at the same time, I kept descending into this place. No matter how many highs I hit, I would return to this place that, seemed to be very familiar. So I kind of just accepted the fact that I just must be this depressed, dark guy, basically. And I returned home from university before Christmas at that time, which would have been 2017. And I like to say I enjoyed the last of my limited view of life. So I went home, didn't really change or do anything. I just, continued to be in that space. But at home, let's say I changed environment, but my inner environment was still exactly the same. Around autumn 2018, the depression became very intense again. And again, at that time, I labeled it as depression, but it could just be called intense emotions and or despair. And all of the other kind of symptoms in between where I'm navigating my life. That was always still there with me. And I desired massive change. I don't know why, but it's like I knew that everything that I had been doing in my past led me to that present moment. And if that was the case, everything in the past is basically up to be changed, and I'm willing to do something about that. So I changed my diet just because that was a simple thing to do. I basically kind of like cut out a lot of things. I'd say I went plant-based, although now my diet is open again. At that time, it was just something for me to do, something to motivate me to basically change and, yeah, just take little steps. I also started doing cold showers, although I'm not a fan of that and I'm not a fan of the cold. I like the side effect of how it makes me feel in the same way that, I don't always like to go and exercise, but I love how I feel after I've gone to the gym. I basically began to question everything. I remember growing up, my dad always used to say to me, there's nothing wrong with asking questions. And if someone says you can't ask a question, ask them more questions. And I was basically, just really prepared to go within myself and start to understand emotional intensity. I started to study more, and I went to Eastern philosophy and the unseen world. And again, for the person that I was and where I came from, where I can't see or touch it, it's not real, that was very, very uncomfortable to me because that's outside of what I accept to being real, you could say. But for me to actually understand this thing that has been with me, that I needed to do that. I would say I was in a state of desperation in a way, but also you might say courage and surrender. I actually had some profound, transcendental, divine experiences that were not drug induced. I was actually asleep and having a dream. And yeah, the only way I can describe it is like my mind was taken outside of the box, put back inside, and nothing was the same after that. I then began a strict meditation practice, and interestingly, that's not something I would do. Anyone that suggested that to me in the past prior, I'd say, "What are you talking about? Are you crazy?" And judge them. But for some reason, after that experience, every day I'd get up at 5 a.m. and I would sit for 30 minutes and just meditate. And I didn't know how to meditate. I just knew that I needed to sit and be with myself and observe my internal processes. I remember when I would first do it, it was like every car that went past, every time my phone buzzed, any type of external thing going on, I need to get up, look, and I'm agitated. I was never really at rest. And I realized how agitated I was for a long time when I really tried to rest and do absolutely nothing. It's like I couldn't be in my own state of being for a long time. Over time, of course, it basically expanded my sense of self, because when you sit and do nothing for enough time, something looks back at you when you're not thinking. And I connected to that part of myself, interestingly. My perspective of life slowly changed because my perspective of myself changed. And I realize now that I subconsciously connected to my emotions that I desire to balance and integrate. Of course, to do that, like if you wanted to pass a test, you've got to revisit it and pass those tests, metaphorically speaking. So I needed to revisit the emotions in full. I didn't really understand that at the time, but looking back, I would say, how can I know I've, let's say, attained a degree of balance or mastery if I'm not tested to see how well I would do with a certain situation, let's say, where that might trigger me. But then I started a mentoring job and doing off-site learning with young people that were outside of mainstream education. But I do want to say around this time when I was questioning everything, there were some questions that I started to ask myself, because essentially I realized that I wanted to be in a state of integrity and I didn't want to lie to myself, which means I need to live my own truth. And to do that, I had to discover what that truth was. So at that time of desiring change and also losing my sense of identity and Googling, I don't know who I am and who am I, and depersonalization and that stuff, something else in me, that thing that looked back at me while I was meditating, saw it as a great opportunity to start fresh. And the questions I asked myself were, who am I? What is my story? And what story am I telling myself? How great can life become? And I say it like that because there was a time when I was in a space and it's like, look how bad my life is. How bad, or look how terrible life is, or look how sad my life is. Then I kind of connected to the contrasting feeling of, well, look how great my life is. That means I could say that. So for me to get to that place, I asked the question, how great can life become? And that was like the catalyst for me to start that path and that journey to, let's say, discover the answer to this question. And also, I asked myself, what can I make more room for in my life right now? Where there was like kind of like a clean slate. How do I want to rebuild myself? How do I want to, use everything from the past and what I've experienced to then build myself into the next version of myself, you could say. And basically, I asked these questions so I could discover and embrace new beliefs. And if I can have new beliefs, I can have new experiences, and I could allow them to change me and see who or what I would become in the process. Of course, not everyone likes that or agreed with that. Some of the things that I would do and the changes I would make, not everyone agreed with. But for me to, let's say, remain in a state of integrity and basically honor the commitment that I had made to myself, it was a no-brainer. To me, I realized the people that didn't like that or didn't understand were not really meant for me, which is also difficult because then I had to learn to let go as well. So I started that mentoring job, and it was very valuable. It was quite familiar and triggering in some ways because a lot of these young people that had, conditions in their own way and their background and their environment, I've seen a lot of parallels. So in a lot of ways, it's like I'm seeing my younger self in a way. But as I helped them to work through what they were going through, as I would offer them the education through different mediums, it would just be like spending quality time with them, essentially. I learned how to connect and calm down and realize that just being in a state of clarity and vibing a good energy that's calm and, warm, you could say, or embracing, allows others to actually open up as well. And that's what I needed from myself. So working with the young people really helped me do that. I'd say I started my dream job at that time, doing project coordination at Bristol City Football Club in autumn 2019. And then, of course, COVID happened. So that kind of came to an end very quickly. Not because I couldn't do the job or anything, but I had obviously started a bit of a journey at that time. And then I was kind of going back into work. And something in me was like, well, you haven't really addressed anything fully. Yes, you're meditating, and yes, you're doing some yoga and whatnot, and reading and studying more, but there's still a lot more work to be done. So I left that job in September 2020, and that was actually emotionally painful because of how I was, let's say, attached to the idea of being that person, you could say. But of course, because of my practices, I still had the inner skills to maintain that expanded perspective and avoid falling too deeply into that dark identity that was always there and still is there, you could say. But I was essentially cultivating self-love and learning how to connect with myself. I learned more skills around emotional regulation, teaching myself Spanish, and just general self-knowledge, and getting back into doing media-related stuff because I like to be creative. I was essentially building myself from the inside out and complementing my conditions rather than trying to suppress them and turn them away. I realized if they're going to be with me, I may as well learn how to connect with it. And I was basically doing fulfilling habits, and I was stacking those habits, and I continue to do these things. And now it's like I just live in a type of flow. So for the most part of 2021, I definitely had a lot of my worst emotional episodes. I felt a lot of despair and anger about life and basically wanted to check out, if you get what I mean, from this world. I felt like I deserved it, and I felt like I essentially identified with that voice because, again, I'm going back into that place, and I'm wondering, like, why does this keep happening? What do I need to do? I'm trying everything. I'm applying myself as much as I can. Again, I was feeling quite desperate, I had a lot of pride as well for being insightful and independent because of, my background. And I see now that it's also partly learning to be willing to accept support because of, my independence. We wouldn't live in a world where there's other people if we didn't need to, connect. I say it like that as well because let's say I have a desire to help people. If I have a desire to help people, someone out there must need to be helped, So I'd rather suffer in silence because I wasn't really sure how to talk about it. And, again, that pride and, the attachment to that made it difficult for me to even open up about it. I spent a night in the hospital after a particularly challenging episode. I was very self-destructive at that time. And I remember I didn't really know how to express how I was feeling still. I couldn't verbalize it. And that was an issue. It's important to note that I did go through that, what I call toxic positivity thing, where I'd say, oh, life's great. I'm happy now and things are all good. And it's like, well, that's not inclusive of my past. And I would still feel all of the anger and all of those feelings. So I understood that although I had embraced a lot of positive, good energy, there was all that negativity or the dark stuff about myself that I hadn't really included yet. And this is what was really being called out, let's say. I felt like I had tried everything. And I remember that the nurses that were there at the time were like, well, why don't you try mindfulness? Why don't you try meditation, yoga, and all of that stuff? And I was like, well, I do that like every day. This is what I do. I've been trying this for the last couple of years of my life. And I think they noticed that because I was basically applying myself and really giving it a go and, basically made that commitment to myself, they referred me to the recovery team or the Bristol Central Mental Health Recovery Team to get support. And considering the conditions of the world at that time, I knew I had to take it. It was around 10 years to the time when I was diagnosed as depressed in school and got referred to counseling. And in my mind then it's like, well, would it be another 10 years? Do I even want to wait that time? And where things, again, challenging in the world at that time, I just had to take it. Again, like I said, you could say it's desperation. Another part would say having the courage. And I was ready to give it all of my effort. It's important to know at this time as well, as I'm, let's say, establishing a more authentic connection to myself, like I say, you can't lie to yourself. You have to be truthful. You can only speak your truth. So again, I asked myself some more questions. These questions, let's say, came to the surface because I was ready to know the answer. I don't think I would have even accepted the personal answer to some of these questions, let's say, if I asked these years in the past. So, the questions were, do I have any beliefs about myself, the world, or life in general that are in conflict with some greater knowing? What events have caused me to feel uneasy with life? And also, do I have any rules or promises to myself that I won't break for anyone? And this last one here is challenging because it highlighted to me that I don't really, at that time, have any boundaries. And again, a lot of this here is like, well, I had beliefs that I'm unworthy of love, or I have low self-esteem, so I'll never be able to do that, or I can't do this. Those beliefs are in conflict with my knowing that I can. So I had to address the core element of those beliefs and potentially the events that are linked to those beliefs being formed. So I was, of course, referred to receive support from the mental health recovery team, and I began seeing a structured clinical management practitioner. I would meet every other week or so, and we would do like one-to-one meetings. It was a type of dialectical behavioral therapy based off of cognitive behavioral therapy, and we would essentially just have a conversation. They called it formulation, and I would kind of talk about my past and how I was seeing my past and how I relate that to my present. And basically through doing that, I kind of learned how to change my language of how I define the things that happened to me. And I also engaged with a closed group where we did psychoeducation and problem solving. It was called problem solving group, interestingly. And essentially it was meeting with a group of people that experience emotional intensity as well. And we'd all just talk about the things that challenge us, and we'd suggest things to each other how we can work through that. And all of this stuff was voluntary. I didn't have to do this. But because of what I wanted for myself, I needed to do this. So I didn't really have a choice in that way. I also started to do, at that time, Bristol Wellbeing College workshops. This is a service that's offered for people that are also doing this type of stuff, working with the services or service users. And I remember I was doing the workshop Writing with Emotion, and they said it was like a very brief exercise. They gave us a piece of paper and said, we're going to give you 5 minutes and write something from your emotions. And I remember I sat there and I looked at that paper and I almost started crying because I didn't know how to write from my emotions. I was like, I can't let it flow. And it's like, it's going to flow out my eyes, but it's not going to flow out my pen. So it made me realize that I had a lot more work to do. And of course, building resilience and reframing loneliness, because again, I would say, I'm a lonely person. Now I'd say, no, I enjoy solitude. I love my own company, and I appreciate what I call regenerative solitude. But there are times when I'm not actually being in my solitude, I am withdrawing. So it's like a double-edged sword that I have to use my discernment to be aware of, to understand why I may be spending time alone. I also looked at like shadow work by Carl Jung and, inner child stuff and all of that stuff. I basically threw myself at the self-help world and all of that stuff and consumed all of that information, you could say. But I was essentially just processing the traumatic experiences that I had been through. Some were more, let's say, if you want to talk about, I don't know, comparing trauma that you can. Some were more intense and some were a bit more trivial. For example, this isn't a real one, but let's say as a child, I was left at the park as a kid. I might have abandonment issues. And obviously as a kid, that is a legitimate thing. But as an adult, if you leave that unaddressed, that could erode certain things in your life and make it difficult to even form relationships, or at least healthy relationships. I engaged with every opportunity that could help me, but I remember there was always huge resistance. Every step on this journey always feels like step one. I feel better within myself, but I always feel like every step, and even doing this, is fresh, it's new, it's uncomfortable. You can probably smell my perspiration. So I integrated a new awareness. I began using holistic therapy, something that I would have never even entertained for a long time. I started to practice energy healing, more specifically in the form of Reiki. And I did level 1, level 2, and then became a Reiki master. I started to understand the spiritual aspects of life, because that's something that I would neglect and I would completely dismiss from my worldview. I started to understand emotional energy in relation to the human body and chakra system, and how that will manifest as physical and behavioral symptoms, as mentioned. I started to release and integrate emotional energy. I say release the energetic bonds to the experiences that were no longer serving me, and creating new energetic bonds to the experiences that do fulfill me, like, when I do my new, more positive and fulfilling habits. I essentially brought union between light, dark, positive, negative, masculine, feminine within myself. I started writing creatively and essentially just channeling my vivid inner world. I'm a very vivid dreamer, and I like to express all of my inner dimensions through all of the various forms of art I like to do, whether that's writing, drawing, or media production. And basically just mastering the art of being a human, which I was, essentially humbling myself so I could do that because I didn't know. So my ongoing recovery, or I like to say things that encourage me to thrive. Exercise is really good for me. It helps me to ground. When I, let's say, when I feel intense emotions or just general feelings, whether that's highs or lows, I'll go to the gym and I will just push that energy through. And yeah, it just essentially focuses my mind, a type of sensory immersion, rather than immersing myself in things that I don't need to be immersed in. Reflecting was also healthy for me, like the cold showers. I did not like to reflect, but I like being in a state of clarity, and reflection allows that. So I got into the habit, of course, still meditating. I meditate every day now. Of course, sometimes I miss, and journaling as well. I see journaling as, imagine a ball of yarn that is multicolored, and that's like your mind, and it's all confused. Journaling helped me to unravel that ball of yarn and get every single thing out in order and organize my thoughts and organize my mind so I can be in a type of flow, and I learn how to, let's say, align my mind to be in a state of heart brain coherence, either or. And of course, creatively expressing myself through all of the mediums that I like to use: connection, family, friends, and intimacy. By intimacy, I mean, if you've ever done a yoga class and they say, oh, do like eye gaze with a person that is in the class, and you just look in their eyes for like 5 minutes, and it's a very intimate thing, just to connect with someone on that level. Also, the connection with myself and learning how to be with myself, because how can I connect with another person if I don't know who I am and how I like to connect with people? That's how I understood a lot of my relationships in the past were never going to last, because they were built on a false connection or a fake identity, or a distorted identity is a more accurate description. And rest, of course. It's weird to say that I didn't know how to breathe until I learned how to meditate, because I realized my breathing rhythm was just out of sync. And let's say if I'm getting angry, my breathing will go out of sync. Whereas now it's like I can use my breathing as a type of anchor to align my focus, to stay calm, and regulate myself, you could say. And muscle relaxation as well. Again, I like to be active and do things, but it's also good to relax. And that's something I definitely struggle with. I've always got tight shoulders, so I like to get massages and go to the spa to relax. But also always expanding my comfort zone. I realized that doing cold showers and all of this stuff that was giving me better discipline and improving me as a person, I realized continuing to do that was good for me. It's like I just realized I don't want to settle for less. I have a huge appetite for life, and I've got drive and energy to achieve all of that. So I'm going to make that happen, and nothing can get in my way other than myself. I also had to have the vulnerability to reach out and admit that I do need support at times, to constantly challenge that pride within myself and the need to be independent and that type of thing. But I still regularly feel emotional intensity. As I say, I'm an intense person, but recognition is key. It's like, you can say hot, cold, two ends of a spectrum. I can be at either end, and for a long time I only knew how to be at either end. But now it's like I find my balance in the center. If necessary, I can go to either end if I want to. Let's say I don't get angry, but I will embody an energy of anger to enforce a boundary, perhaps, if I need to. And if not that, a bit of jiu-jitsu will always help people calm down and be respectful. But I like to continue to discover facets of my being. I describe it like that because, we are like, I don't know, a gem, a diamond, if you want to call it that. And as you discover more about yourself and you polish the surfaces internally, you discover more things about yourself. I know myself in a way that I never thought that I would know myself as. And for me, that's very exciting. I like to do that. So this is what I like to do moving forwards. And I don't know how that will look moving forward in 5 years. all of this stuff here I may totally disagree with, but right here, right now, this is my truth. I also accept now that my efforts are enough, and I'm in cruise control. I don't feel the need to, keep working excessively diligently. I just take steps as they come around now, and I'm not, let's say, surviving anymore. I like to say I'm thriving. And I have now a inner compassionate voice, because my inner voice in the past was pretty harsh, pretty critical, judgmental, and almost wouldn't give me a break. It's like I'd say there's a drill sergeant in my mind that just won't let me be at peace. And I learned how to not necessarily negotiate with it, but reason and make sense of why that voice is there. So, as I prefer to be in a state of balance, I began to recognize the signs and symptoms of this, like how I recognized the state of being out of balance for a long time. So, personally, I would say I feel a lot more self-empowered and just, have the drive to lead my own life, you could say. I have the courage and confidence to be myself, and I can remain calm in the face of adversity. My mind is clear, my emotions are balanced, I feel a spiritual harmony and a purpose in my life, and I can be consistent and have the resilience to actually achieve the things that I want to achieve. It does, again, require discipline to be able to do that, but as I have clarified my goals and I live by these principles and the promises that I've made to myself, when those things are challenged, it's a non-negotiable for me. Interpersonally, I have much more healthier boundaries, which enable me to actually have stable connection. They are still intense because of the person I am, but they're a lot more stable and there's less, let's say, paranoia involved. I can be a bit more attentive to people, as in I can sit down and, let's say, have a conversation and not be in my head while I'm actually trying to listen to the person that I'm talking to. I'm a lot more embracing and accepting of other people as well, and also to support and learning how to trust people. Because I trust myself, I know I can invite people into my world, into my sphere, and I can trust that they will, let's say, not nourish me, but like contribute towards my peace. Because if they don't, get out of my world, essentially. But now I'm a lot more expressive and assertive for what I believe to be true and what I want to express. And I'm much more better at being in a state of focus and flow rather than distraction. And I can work a lot more efficiently. I can essentially focus my mind and achieve what I want in a shorter amount of time. So I always feel like I always have a lot of time, excess, abundant time, you could say. And now I would say I am thriving. And again, people say, "Oh, how are you doing?" And I say, "I'm thriving." And they say, "Oh, I'm just getting by." And I say, "Well, you enjoy that then. If you change your language and speak in a different way, you'll get different results." Like I would say in the past, I don't want to feel depressed is a different statement to saying I choose to feel courageous and empowered. One of them is speaking in negatives and the other one is speaking from an empowered, positive place. But now my life is a lot more passionate, and I would certainly say I'm a lot more detached as well. Because all of this stuff here, like the stuff earlier, the more negative stuff, is easy to say, I'm this guy, form an ego around it. But again, in 5 years' time or whenever, I may not be this person anymore. Things may change. So I remain detached from all of these things, because if I need to, I can be dynamic in the person that I show up as. But again, it takes a lot of focus and discipline to do this. So, looking back at where I've come from, I would say that I've allowed myself access to awareness that expand my possibilities. For a long time, I was unconsciously experiencing life. Of course, I had a degree of understanding, but I couldn't really connect the dots. And still to this day, some dots don't connect, but I don't try and force that understanding. I just wait for insight to come to the surface, you could say. I'd say I never was out of touch with reality. I've always, been in this world. But I would say I had a high dissociation and loss of identity. And that was the challenge of navigating the world, of not knowing who I am and the place I have in this world. Basically, I have released myself from the grip of beliefs that no longer serve me. And of course, when I was questioning everything, I basically kind of unsubscribed from the things that were no longer me, or the things that I was told to be true, but it was in conflict with my greater knowing. And as I discovered that, the things that, didn't align with that had to be let go. And there was a lot of societal beliefs of, you should be this way, or you should do this, or you have to be that, or, as a man, you've got to be this. And it's like, well, I can just do whatever I want. I know what I stand for now. which is relieving. But of course, the journey to discover all of that was very challenging. But accessing resonant information helped. By that, I mean, if you meet someone and they say, hey, you should read this book, or someone sends you a link and, certain bits of information stands out. For example, as on this presentation, I don't doubt not every single word you may agree with, but there are certain things where it's like, oh, this is true, this is resonant with me, it strikes a chord, right? But some information I'd say came from inner knowing and proved itself to be true. By that, I mean, I didn't read it in a book, I didn't get told by anyone. It could be in meditation, but it could also just be I'm going for a walk and it's like, whoa, I understand this now. Some people say it's like a download, I sometimes, why, I'm very introspective, I can notice a difference between inner insight, and sometimes it may sound weird, it feels like there's being a wave projected to my brain, and I interpret it as a conceptual idea, and I can then translate that into something that I can take action on. Perceive that how you will. But now I prefer to live in a way that encourages me to thrive, because that is my choice, and that is my preference. I choose to tell an empowering story as a co-creator in this world. There are people that say, why does this always happen to me? And I say, well, why don't you say, why is this happening for you? Because then you'll get the answer to why it's happening, and then you can actually move past the situation. Otherwise, you'll be fated to continue to live out the same experiences until you understand why you're having them. Or even if you don't understand, you still just choose to empower yourself to move through them regardless. But now my inner peace is non-negotiable. That is one thing that I can give to myself and no one else can take unless I give away my power. And of course, it's required absolute surrender and commitment to the unknown. I would also say as well that, let's say an instrument, in fact, I will touch on that in a minute. Anger taught me to honor my needs and to honor my boundaries. Low self-esteem taught me that I have to discover my own self-worth. Anxiety and worry taught me to be present and detach from outcomes. Guilt showed me that I have a large heart. Shame taught me to embrace my imperfections. Sensitivity taught me that I am a delicate. Sensitivity taught me that I am a delicate, fine-tuned instrument. I say it like that because, let's say, if you have an instrument and it's in tune and you play it, it's great and it sounds good. But a really, truly skilled player can play an instrument that's out of tune. So when I say to people, they say, like, how have you become like this? I want to be like that. I say, well, you start with what you have. If your instrument's out of tune or yourself is out of balance, learn to work with that. And over time, you'll find your balance and then you'll just be in that state of staying in tune. And darkness showed me how bright I really am. So the even bigger picture. I can create profound and impactful work when channeling my emotions creatively. I can use my logical mind and intuitive feelings to make coherent and grounded decisions. You may have heard of the wise mind thing where you have that Venn diagram and two circles cross and you match logic and intuition and you see where you can actually allow this to cross over. But of course, if let's say I am solving a math problem, it's going to be your logic. And let's say I'm scanning someone's chakras and I'm trying to read their energy, it's probably going to be intuitive, you could say. But I can connect to my deep empathetic feelings now, which is also a double-edged sword in some ways because, I see a lot of injustice in the world as my awareness has expanded and I see things as they are. I understand how things are, very challenging and need to improve. Taking my light, bro, what are you doing? Anyway, I see how things need to improve. Thank you. That's good. That'll be all right. Yeah, I see how things need to improve, but instead of getting beaten up and thinking, wow, the world's got a lot of injustice, and going home and being upset about it, or there's so many people that I see a homeless person and I just want to give them all my money. Well, then what? Then I won't be able to take care of myself. So the empathy thing is a challenge because I can't do anything for anyone. Like no one could do anything for me. I had to want to do that. So in a way, the empathy has showed me that I can be an example, but I don't necessarily have to put myself or be anyone's savior because everyone is their own savior, And I can also trust in my intuitive perception and extrasensory perception. By that, I mean we live in a type of intelligent field, a quantum field, if you want to call it that, whether you believe that. And there is information that can be translated through that beyond our senses, but can still be interpreted through the senses, But my condition is something that I meet with respect. when I learned to listen to it, it was actually one of my many teachers. In some ways, a better teacher than the happy feelings, because it really enabled me to connect to the part of myself that I was disconnected from. And the challenges are really opportunities to grow. Instead of being triggered, it's my invitation to actually liberate myself even further and say, well, what can I learn from this? Why is this happening for me? And how can I continue to evolve? So, what is recovery? It's embarking on a journey of self-discovery and mastery. It's committing to embracing all aspects of yourself and life. It's the courage and willingness to engage with support being provided to you. It's taking accountability for what you have control of. It's to respond rather than react where possible, because I certainly still make mistakes. I certainly fail, but I will always get back up, and that is why I succeed. It's finding your balance and staying in that balance as you continue to grow and expand. It's to let your inner child to be free. For those of you who are a little bit spiritual, it's to balance and harmonize the discordant patterns in your chakras and in your aura. So, what inspires me? The people that have been patient with me during my challenging times, the people that devote their lives to helping others. The idea of contributing to a world that supports people to fully embrace themselves. The people that seen the potential in me that I couldn't see. And again, the moments of synchronicity where spirit and matter seem to become one. So the even bigger picture, everyone has their own predispositions and challenges and paths in life. And I say all paths are true and valid, because if someone did everything that I did on my journey, they may not arrive at the place that I've arrived at. Likewise, if I did something that someone else did, I may not arrive at the place that I'm at now. So I always say anywhere can lead to anywhere. Your start and your finish is not important. What's important is the journey that you take to get there. But people have different levels of awareness of this journey. Some people have no idea what's going on in the world, and some people are really invested and actually know what's going on. And people have different capacity to learn and understand life. And how can we, make sense of that? How can we be inclusive of that? What if someone doesn't ever desire to consciously grow or want to improve themselves, and that person might be in your life and someone that you care about? How would you make peace with that? So again, for me, I've learned to remain detached from that and understand that people are where they are and they can be where they're at. I was in a certain place for a long time, and until I chose to change, I was, keeping myself in that constricted place. And some people respected that, and some people tried to encourage me to move beyond that. But only did it really change when I decided that for myself. But engaging with life to the best of your ability is very important. By that, here today, it's doing a presentation and, being thorough with what I want to discuss and, applying myself in this way. And tomorrow, because this has been exhausting doing these presentations, I'm going to stay at home all day and I'm going to eat whatever food I like, and I'm just going to enjoy myself. It's good to have that balance. But of course, if I did, stay at home and eat junk food and whatever and play video games all day, that's not going to get me towards where I want to be. And eventually, that comfort will actually be my own prison. So when I say engage with life to the best of your ability, it can be wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and whatever you're being asked to do. And like for me, rest is something that I struggle to engage with in some ways, funnily enough. But it's in our nature to expand as self-aware beings. We are a part of nature. And as far as I can tell, none of you or myself are the exception to that rule. Humanity has outgrown the box we were once in. And I think my story is just one part of 8 billion chapters or more if you include the natural world. And your story is unique and yet to be discovered. We're here to be our perfectly imperfect selves, and you are enough as you are. However, I would say be mindful of the identity that forms around that, and always remember to continue to grow. Your story is always being written, and as far as I can tell, we never stop. So it's best to just align with the process and enjoy what's happening as it unfolds. So we're going to finish off where we started with a couple of questions that you can ponder in your own time. Again, nothing new. What is the title for this chapter of your life, or the chapter that you're going into? Who are you, and what is your story? And what can you make more room for in your life right now, whether it's rest, study, or self-introspection, or whatever you want to do. Life flows and unfolds in a spiral motion of ever-expanding cycles, and our story is continuing to be written. There is no promise that life will get easier, and there is no promise that things will get better. but you can make promises to yourself. You can make a promise to be balanced, resilient, and resourceful, and to cultivate the courage and strength to live up to your potential. Remember, we are all figuring it out, putting the pieces of ourselves back together, and we're doing that with each other. So we have arrived. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your patience and your attentiveness. You're more than welcome to follow me on Instagram. This is where I share like my personal life and my lifestyle, and my more colorful aspect of my personality. And this is my podcast, and let's say my more self-development related stuff, where I explore topics that are more focused towards being a better person. But what I'm going to do now is open up the floor for some questions if you have any. But yeah, thank you again for listening. Oh my God. Whew. Jeez, that was an hour.